people make different choices. And I think
Yeah.
that's the ultimate message here. Know
Thank you.
yourself, make your
Yeah.
choice, be willing to be humble and curious, know your
Mm-hmm.
triggers, know your needs, know your dreams, act accordingly.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. I want to know if you can relate to something that I'm going to share with you, which is that when I was on the fence about whether to have kids or stay child-free, something that really stuck out in my mind when I regarded, we'll call it today's parents, is just how intense people seem to parent today. Like, it felt like what I witnessed growing up versus the way I saw moms and dads and parents doing things today had changed dramatically. I'm talking about like people who seem to not ever get a babysitter because they couldn't leave their children at any point in time. And people who are just so involved with their kids' homework and their kids' soccer practices and being there for each and every last mundane activity and having to sort of play with their kids and never letting their kids have a dull moment on their own. This is something that I didn't experience so much growing up, although as it turns out, I am very much in part of this generation of what I'm referring to as intensive parenting. And today we're going to be talking all about this because I think the culture of parenting is something that's keeping people stuck and unsure. And I'm bringing someone on today who is a mother of two herself. She is someone who is an expert on these topics that I've just referred to. And she's going to tell us if it can and why it should maybe be another way. Julie Lythcott Haims believes in humans and is deeply interested in what gets in our way. Her work encompasses writing, speaking, public service, and activism, and she is a New York Times bestselling author of books on human development, a TED speaker, a former Stanford dean and lawyer, and she holds degrees from Stanford University, Harvard Law, and the California College of the Arts. She serves on numerous nonprofit boards whose work focuses on equity, education, youth, wellness, and the arts. Julie lives in Palo Alto, California with her partner of over 30 years. They're itinerant young adults and her mother, and she's also a member of the Palo Alto City Council. Thank you so much for being here, Julie. We had a fantastic pre-conversation, and if that's any indication, we're going to just get right into the good stuff today. What I want to start with is, first of all, just tell us, you are a woman of many different personas. You've done so many cool things in your life. If you could describe yourself to our audience today, what do we need to know about who Julie is?
Well, Keltie, thanks for having me. And I want to appreciate not just you, but the audience, the listeners. I hope everyone listening finds something that they can really take away that helps them on their journey. That's kind of what I'm about. I'm someone who roots for humans. I really believe in all of us. I'm an empath. I try to do what I can to try to help other humans in their journey. I think that comes from a place of deep unbelonging in my earliest childhood. I'm American, I'm African American, I'm a light-skinned Black biracial person, and I was usually the only person who looked remotely like this where I grew up. And so I was otherized, I was problematized, I was really told in no uncertain terms that something was wrong with me and my parents' marriage and my beautiful Black father. And I think that instilled in me young a deep compassion for humans. I knew as a little kid, I don't want anyone to feel the way I am feeling. And I couldn't have said this as a little one. I can say this now at 56, looking back on the choices I've made to be a lawyer, to be a university dean, to be a nonfiction author, to run for local office, to run for federal office. All of these things have been in furtherance of trying to do my part to make things a little better. I'm also a mom. I have a 24-year-old son, 22-year-old daughter. I am in a life partnership and marriage of time of togetherness with Dan of 36 years. And my elderly mother is also in my day-to-day life. So that's a little bit about me professionally, personally, and existentially.
Wow, you did a beautiful job kind of tying that all together as best as one can when they've lived such a interesting, colorful life thus far. I look forward to seeing what comes next and the little snippets of your journey that I have been privy to. I want to shout out your memoir, Real American, which I'm about 2/3 of the way through right now. I have to say, I'm typically a book reader, not a listener,
Yes.
but the audio version of your book is just so beautiful to hear your voice, and you write so poetically. And of course, your other works as well, which will be, yay,
There's
Real
the
American.
book.
Amazing.
Little baby
Okay,
me on the cover. Yeah.
So beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And I am the narrator of the book, of all my books. And I want you to know, Keltie, when I recorded this book, which is a raw, vulnerable account, prose poetry account of what it has been like to be Black and biracial in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I was recording it in Baltimore and at a recording studio because I was giving talks there. And my voice broke at one point. You know, I'm reading, these are all little vignettes, as you know, having listened to it. It's just story after story after story, very little analysis. And my voice broke with emotion. And I looked through the glass at the white male producer, you know, in the other room. And I said, I'm guessing you want me to redo that. And he said, sounds like that's what the book wants. You know, like it's okay for me to have been emotional. Sounds like that's what the book wants instead of, yeah, take it again. And
I was worried you were saying that he said, sounds like the book wants you to redo.
Oh,
and
sorry.
I'm like,
Nope.
wrong.
Nope. Sorry.
That's why there was like the pregnant pause.
I was like, Keltie's not getting this. Yeah, no, he was like, nope.
Yeah.
I think we're good. Sounds like that emotion is what the book wants.
Yeah.
And I just was like, God bless you, white man, who has not had this experience that I've just, you know, spoken of and written about. And I just felt so seen and held in that moment. So that's the voice you're listening to in the audiobook right now.
Yeah. Well, and those emotions come through so strongly. Can only suggest that people listen to your beautiful book, your memoir, which is one of my favorite genres. And this is a really good memoir.
Thank you.
Real American. And of course, I mean, while we're on the topic of books, you have two other books that I feel are also quite relevant to our conversation today. Tell us about those two.
Well, I'd be happy to. Thank you. This is book number 1 that really established me as an author, How to Raise an Adult, Break Free of the Overparenting Trap, and Prepare Your Kid for Success. Really speaks to that intensive micromanaging concierge parenting that has been common now in this country and many others for, 2.5 decades, probably. Mm-hmm. I saw the harm of it as a dean at Stanford, and I wrote about the harm because I'm rooting for young adults to thrive. And then I wrote a sequel to that book. So this book is the first. It made me a published author. It allowed me to get the memoir published. The third book is Your Turn, How to Be an Adult. It's sort of considered a sequel to this one. This one is for young adults. It's a thick book on, how to be an adult. It's like how to live your best adult life, where you're in charge. You decide, yourself, like yourself, love yourself, figure out who you are, go be that person. This is me rooting for the individual to be themselves, unfettered by society's expectations or family's judgment or what have you. It covers everything from grief to money to mental health and, work and relationships and, all, and like figuring out how to get your first apartment. It's just a manual for living your best life in your adulthood. It's meant for young adults, but it's really for anyone who's ready to re-examine, am I living the life I want to? And if not, what do I want to do about it?
Well, my work is about all of those things, helping people figure out what kind of life they want to live and to examine that and to be intentional about it and to try and tune out the noise, which is so prevalent in all of our lives, especially today with our online world. And I think this episode is going to be airing around the graduation time. So I'm going to say this would be an amazing graduation gift for any grad, and certainly a book that probably all of us need to read because it's so funny. Nobody tells us how to be grown-ups.
Yeah.
And so often we're just following those who went before us, which is not always the best idea, I'm going to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of generational stuff to interrupt, a lot of generational patterns, traumas. And I think we know that now. And I think we and younger generations are working at that. And the 21st century looks a whole lot different than the 20th and 19th did. Rate of change has been just sort of astronomical. We are experiencing things our elders did not have to deal with. For example,
Yeah.
we were talking in the pre-conversation about my elderly mother and, the health issues of elderly and aging people, and people are living longer, which is great. Modern medicine allows us to live. We're healthier. And yet the caregiving responsibilities that attend any family circumstance, which is going to get into the heart of what I think we're, part of what we're talking
Yeah.
about, are such. Like my mom's parents died before they were 60, so she doesn't know in her own experience what it's like to look after the elderly. I'm here, her
Mm-hmm.
daughter, she's now 85. I'm looking after her. She doesn't know what to expect. I don't know what to expect. There are a lot of unknowns. Cost of
Yeah.
living makes it so hard to live lives the way our elders were able to. And so much has changed. So yes, we are sort of alone and swimming and searching, in this new moment with a lot of new variables. We're trying to define life on our own terms, which feels scary, but I think it's
Yeah.
also amazing to not be in the same rut everyone's been in since the 17th century.
Yes. Amen. I agree. Okay, that sets up our conversation perfectly. Now, as is customary for all of our guests, you shared that you're a mom. I really want to hear about and share more about the professional work that you do and all of your insights working with young people. But first and foremost, you have your own young
I
people.
do.
So tell us about how you, first of all, bring us to the decision point. Did you always know you wanted to become a mom, or is this something that you remember consciously having chosen?
Let me answer a different question first, or which
Yes.
is, I am Julie Lythcott Haims. My pronouns are she, they. I am a cisgendered woman, and I'm quite butch. Okay, like I wear hardware, not jewelry. Okay, and I say that because I think there's a lot about mothering and motherhood that's very feminized.
Yes.
And I just want to acknowledge like how I came into this. I might not have been able to describe myself in the ways I just did when I was in my 20s thinking about getting pregnant. But I think these currents of myself were there all along, even if I didn't label them. Okay.
Yeah.
So within that context, and I am in a long-term life partnership with a cisgendered male. We both now identify as bi and queer and all of that. He is a very feminine male. I'm a very masculine female, and man, does that work. Okay. So these two fall in love at 19 and 20 years of age,
Wow.
and 23 and 24, we got married. And yeah, we talked. Actually, I fell in love with Dan in part 5 months into our relationship. We're doing a cross country drive across America. We met in college. The school year had ended. We're now driving from California to the East Coast where both sets of parents live. And, I'm driving. It's my turn to drive. I'm driving. He's in the passenger seat. And he goes, if I ever have kids, I want to be home with them. And instead of realizing I had a bird in the hand, which was a man in 1988 who was saying, if I ever have kids, I want to be home with them, freeing me up to go have the big career. This was the 80s. This was the dream. I got mad at him because he said, if I ever have kids, he had left me out of the sentence. Our relationship was, so I'm like, what do you mean if you ever have kids? Why can't you talk about we're in love. We've been dating for 5 months, like, listen to me. And I mean, we had a fight. I'm still driving. And then finally he says, I think I've been having a hard time admitting that what we have could conceivably last forever.
Wow.
But I think it can. And then, of course, I melt and, we pull over, we at a motel, a pizza, makeup, sex, all of that. Okay. But I want you to know I fell in love with him in part because this was a guy who was interested in being a caregiver of children, which I had heretofore known as an American with a very traditional mom and dad, like this is the woman's job. And here I was with a boyfriend saying, you know what, I think not only would I help, he would never use, I'll help you with the kids, right? Forget that. This is not your role that I'm helping with. He was like, I want this. And why? Because his dad was a very busy corporate lawyer who was never around. And he didn't feel very good, my partner Dan, in that upbringing. And he was like, I wouldn't do that. I would choose to be with kids. So here I've got this guy who wants to raise kids, who's not defined by his career, wants to be defined by his parenting. And that's the path we chose. So we very intentionally wanted kids. I was not someone who like dreamed of my wedding and dreamed of being a mom. It was never like that. It wasn't an always unexamined or Disneyfied thing. I wanted kids. I was, I like kids. I like humans. Why not have some of your own? If you think you're good people, why not make more of, good people? Doesn't the world need the good people to make more people? But we didn't go into it with that. It was just, shouldn't we have kids? Kids might be awesome. And we did. And then Dan did become a stay-at-home dad, part-time stay-at-home dad. My mother also helped us out. And I had the busy full-time career.
And I'm curious how that dynamic was and how that was received at the time. Because even nowadays, I hear that this, stay-at-home father, it's like they're at the playground and people are like, who's this pedophile? We have to call the cops.
Right. Well, there's who's this pedophile on the one hand, and then there's the laudatory praise they get for anything, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're helping your wife. She's so lucky. He's like, I'm not helping. This is my child. This is my obligation and opportunity, and I am choosing it. Yeah. So he's heard it all, believe me. I think in our own families, we also had to contend with this, right? We're both, Stanford educated. That's where we met. And like, Julie's going off to law school and is going to have the big career. And what's Dan doing? He's a designer. Oh, and now Dan's going part-time to look after kids. We had to prepare ourselves for the generational judgment about gender roles, about money, all of that. And fortunately for us, we don't typically can I swear on your podcast?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, please. Yes.
We don't give a shit. Like, we're not going to let family tell us like, why is he doing this and you're doing that?
Yeah.
But we had to regulate ourselves to be able to have those conversations and not lose it. Fortunately, we didn't get too much pushback from family, few raised eyebrows. Maybe I remember because our role switches also go to household chores. Like Dan and I were like 50-50, and I would much rather clean the kitchen and deal with the kitchen. And he would much rather deal with the laundry, including the ironing. And that's the split we made, 35 years ago. Okay. When people
who like ironing,
I know he does. He'll put on the television and now Netflix, whatever, and iron. But we had a family member, my sister's wife. So a queer woman, my sister's wife visiting the area, staying with us or, staying for a few hours, comes over. I'm watching Michael Jordan and the Bulls play basketball. It was like a playoff. And Dan, who hates sports, is in the living room ironing, watching to be near me. And she was like, this queer lesbian, feminist was like, what is going on? This does not look right. And we're like, what do you mean it doesn't look right? He hates sports. He's just interested in being near me. And why not do the laundry while he's watching me enjoy this show? Like, there's nothing wrong with this. And it was surprising to hear even the family member we would have thought would have gotten it the most, like, don't look at the gendered aspect of this, look at, we're both enjoying ourselves right now. Why is that problematic?
Yeah. It's so interesting because I think like in theory, we like to embrace these, I don't want to call them modern ideas. They shouldn't be modern at all, but in practice, it's something different. And I know my brother-in-law took his wife's last name, and like it's caused a bit of an uproar amongst his family. And I know even my own family, having mentioned that, it's kind of like, oh, why is he taking her last name? And there's the inferences that are made about that and the rules. And it's just so funny because it's like, and I don't know how much of that has to do with Germany versus other places, right? That may be more commonplace. And I didn't change my name and it was a non-issue as far as I know. And I don't really care. Similar to yourself. It's like, who gives a shit? I've got an amazing last name. I'm not becoming a Hefele. Sorry. But everyone agrees that was the right choice. But yeah, it's funny how we can say like, oh yeah, of course. And of course, we can change rules or we can decide what makes sense based on, as you say, what we enjoy or what suits us. But when that comes into practice, it's interesting to hear that even amongst people who maybe you would imagine have the most kind of open minds to things, it's still like, oh, this is a little bit weird. This is a little bit different.
Yeah. I mean, I should mention I'm Black, right? And Dan's also white and Jewish. So we're different races. He's, like we could not be more different in we could, but we're really different. We're really violating all kinds of norms. And
Yeah.
frankly, we know it and we like it. I think
Yeah.
part of what we offer as a couple is, hey, we're different and
Mm.
we're not going to impose our differences on you in any kind of, you know, you have to be like us way, but we're going to
Yeah.
be us, and that's going to have to be okay. And I will
Yeah.
say, look at my last name. If people can see it on the screen, Julie Lythcott Haims. Lythcott, my daddy's name, Haims was Haimovich until they
Mm.
changed it at Ellis Island. Okay, that's Dan's ancestry, Eastern European Jews.
Yeah.
Haimovich became Haims, a long time ago in America, and he hyphenated as well as me. So
Yeah.
we knew as a mixed race couple, it was important for us to have the same last name if we were to have kids. And this is an indication that kids were always part of the plan.
Yeah.
We knew if we had kids, I knew having a white mother and a black father, the presumption of not belonging to the parent I didn't look like, which was my mother, particularly in
Mm-hmm.
rural parts of America. I knew that having the same last name would make it less likely that they could discriminate against our family or keep one kid from one parent because they didn't think we were the actual parent.
Yeah.
So we hyphenated for the sake of the future kids we might have.
Yeah. Very cool. I'm interested, like, for people who are listening, and of course, everyone's story is going to be unique, but for people who perhaps want to embrace parenthood in a way that feels like it falls outside the norm, that they're inspired by your story and they're like, well, that's cool. Maybe there's a different way that we could do this, or we're different in some way, and that's given them hesitation to take on this idea of what motherhood, fatherhood, parenthood, whatever it is, looks like. What advice would you give to someone to, like, hearing you speak, I hear such an assured sense of, this is who I am. This is who we are. We love ourselves. How do people come to be so unwavering in that feeling?
Growth, age, time. I could not have been unwavering in this feeling when I was 20 years younger, 36. I'm
Yeah.
more self-aware now. I mean, it's we it's this glorious thing. You get to an age. I remember reading about this. I remember reading when I was in my 20s and 30s, like, when
Mm.
I'm 70, I will wear purple, like this sort of oration of
Purple.
elderly women would say, like,
Yeah.
I don't care
Yeah. Yeah.
anymore. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever, old lady. Like, it just felt like old people saying, I'm almost dead, so it doesn't matter. Now,
Yeah.
what I realize is, like, no. I have aged to a point where I realize it doesn't matter what you think, what your judgment of me is going to be. All I need is to carry a self-loving self through this world, and I'm good. Because
Yeah.
you can say all you want about me, my choices, my kind, my type, and if I'm self-loving about it, it's like, okay, I see you're judging me. And yet that doesn't pierce me through the heart anymore because I've chosen to love myself regardless of what you think. For me, that
Yeah.
has come simply with not just with time and stage and age, but the willingness through those years to do the
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness work, to develop a
Yeah.
mindfulness practice, to learn how to self-regulate, to know my triggers, to know my needs, to know my dreams, and to be okay with being who I am. So good therapy, good mindfulness, good coaching plus time
Yeah.
equals a human who can speak with ease about a very complex life.
Yeah. So powerful. And I would reiterate, I know for myself, on the flip side of the equation, being a child-free woman, so much of me making peace with and coming to confidence and deciding this is my path was having that self-compassion, because I realized I internalized so many of the judgments from other people about what that meant for me as a woman, and me as a good person, and me wanting to be kind and selfless and all these different things. It was me, first of all, being okay with myself for feeling the way that I did, or having a lack of feeling in certain regards. And that has made it so much easier to, like, really claim and step into the life that I've chosen, and to not care. Like, I'm just like, you can judge me, you can think what you want. And it's interesting because, of course, those judgments still happen, but I also think there's, like, immense or more respect that people then have when they see someone who's so firm in themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are. Like, if for you, as you've become more confident in yourself and had more self-love, that it's changed the way people respond to you as well.
I think it has. It's hard to know. It's hard to measure that, right?
Of
So
course.
how would I measure
This is
that?
unscientific.
If I got letters, if saying like, oh, I admire this and that, which I do. I
Yes.
do a lot of speaking in front of live audiences, and I get to hear what people think they know of me. And I think as I've aged and become more self-regulated, self-aware, self-loving, clearer about my path and my purpose,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm able to create space for others to be themselves. So I'm showing up. I used to be this lawyer who was like arguing all the time and
Mm.
have to be right and have to be perfect. And, I still have some of those tendencies, but when you're that way, it's really hard to make space for others. It's hard to be interested in others. You're just constantly thinking about how to, beat them in the next, rational piece of the argument. And I think I have greater ease within me now, which makes me more able to hear what others are saying and also what they're not saying and read the body language. And so I think this amazing sort of dividend is not only am I self-loving and feel greater ease about this life I'm leading, but I'm probably
Mm-hmm.
easier to be around. So I'm therefore someone who can be alongside others on their journey. I'm grateful for the growth journey that I've been on, and I frankly hope to continue to grow and learn until I take my last breath.
Yeah. You and me both. Part of what can happen is when we're grappling with this kids or child-free decision, we really start going in circles. We get stuck thinking the same things over and over again, sort of being in our well-worn ways. And it can be really hard to take our thinking and our decision-making in a fresh direction, to actually get new insight and to feel like we're making steps forward towards a path, whatever that may be. If you want to break out of that rut that you are in and to get some insight from someone who is not your partner or not your mom, not your best friend, somebody who can really be impartial in this decision and can ask you thoughtful questions and who can make observations about what they're hearing and what you're seeing as far as where you're stuck and what it is you want, you definitely want to check out my Clarity Booster offering. This is the most accessible way of working with me one-on-one. What it is we meet for a 1-hour coaching call where we're going to tackle a specific aspect of your kids or child-free decision, where you're feeling stuck. I'm going to ask you a bunch of thoughtful questions. And after that coaching session, I'm going to give you some specific takeaways and exercises for you to do on your own after our call. Then a couple weeks later, we're going to meet up for a 30-minute follow-up call where we're going to see what kind of traction you've made, where you're at, and where we go from there. If you're interested in checking out the Clarity Booster offering, it's only $349 plus taxes, so it really is the most affordable way of working with me one-on-one, of getting my eyes and ears on whatever it is you're grappling with. I'm going to include the details for the Clarity Booster in the show notes of today's episode, and you can also find those over at kidsorchildfree.com. Again, that's the Clarity Booster. I look forward to hopefully hosting you soon for one of these calls. Back to the show. Now, you not only are a parent to two wonderful kids who I do want to hear more about,
Yes.
and I'm going to have more questions about motherhood as well, but you are a mentor to young people and young adults. You are a former dean at Stanford University, a freshman. So people just, for I don't know if this is a term we use globally, but those who are just embarking on their college or university journey. You still mentor and speak at a lot of different universities. You've, of course, written your books. And so you are, unless I'm mistaken, greatly attuned to and in connection with young people. What are you hearing from people today? Specifically, we can call it teens, people in their 20s. What are you hearing about parenthood and the desire or lack of desire for parenthood amongst these folks?
Yeah. Let me just say as a caveat, I left my role at Stanford 12 years ago. So I have not been a college administrator for quite some time.
Yes.
That said, though, I am in conversation. I travel with my books and I've got audiences with parents and youth in them. And I've got these two kids of my own who I love and adore. Okay, so I will tell you that I was recently at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and for a day-long visit to talk about all this stuff, adulting and making a life that matters to you. And I was sitting down, my opening gig was breakfast with whatever students chose to show up. And I was a little nervous, like, what if none of them show up? Like, how good was the flyer, But they did show up, not just undergrads, which is what I expected, but some grad students showed up. And one of the grad students was originally from China. and she was studying in the US now. And I think she'd been in the US for college and now grad school. And she said to me, make the case for why we should have children. And I smiled and I was like, okay, I'm not sure I'm that person. I'm not sure I'm the person who wants to make that, I accept the implied premise that maybe we shouldn't. And I turned, there were a couple other faculty in the room and I was like, and I'm interested in what these guys think because they also have children, but here's what I'll tell you. And I said, my children's laughter is the most beautiful music I've ever heard. Until I had not one, but two children who made each other laugh, I never heard that beautiful sound. And I'm delighted by it. And I think it's magic. And also, it's a lot of work. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. There's so much you don't know. So many things can go wrong. Like, it's hard. And so, I'm not going to try to make the case to anyone, that is try to convince you or justify it. I'll just tell you, why I did it and what's been, wonderful and what's been hard for me. And I think she was relieved that I wasn't trying to push it. So then once we had that conversation, I said, can I turn the tables now and ask you, why are you asking this question? And she said, well, I think it's really hard in my generation. How do we afford it? How do we, and then look at the climate. She said, why would we bring a child into a warming planet? Like, what's in it? What's in it for us? It looks like drudgery also, right? They see how hard it is in this intensive parenting, micromanaging parenting mode. Why would anyone want to do that? It looks like hell. And it is. So she had all kinds of good reasons for not wanting to bring children into this world. And, I was there to simply say, like, it's great that you're asking the question. The question is extremely important. And whatever you choose is a valid choice. And then knowing she was from China, I was like, okay, and you're from a collectivist society. In America, we tend to be more individualistic. So you have the right to do what you want to do, whereas in China, maybe you don't, right? I said, so you've got a whole system that's decided, there are too many people in this country. We got to have a one-child policy. And now they're seeing the downsides of that, not enough caregivers for the elder. Like, there's the societal need for humans to reproduce, to care for the elderly, and to work jobs and pay taxes, keep the economy going. That's what society needs. But, I think what society would have me do is an entirely different question of what is right for me. The trouble is, if too many individuals make the individually right for me decision, we might not have a society anymore. And I'm not sure my head can comprehend what to do with that conundrum.
Okay, so you don't have an answer for us.
I don't have an answer. But I would err on the side of, you can't possibly wrangle 8 billion people to move in the same direction and do what society needs. I would say, do what you need, be responsible and accountable to you. And, human civilization is going to go into whatever direction it does. And there's, none of us has control over that.
Yeah. It's interesting because, for example, the reasons you shared, which of course are on everyone's minds, the environment and politics and problems that have existed, and new problems, and quote, the drudgery, which certainly can exist. I think also media portrayals are interesting because I think there are important, honest conversations happening about what parenthood actually entails. I don't think backlash is the right word, because I feel like not enough people can know that we can have a decision in this, and we should make the decision that feels right for us and our respective partners and families and what have you. And of course, who and what is important, like you say, that's going to depend very much on the culture from which we come. I am interested though, and I don't know, everything on the internet becomes reduced to very simplistic kind of views. There tends to be a big lack of nuance, but I would say specifically amongst people who I'm going to gauge, again, this is just based on speculation, what I see on my reels and my posts, but like, they're probably in their late teens, early 20s. They stumble upon my content. There seems to be this real like, ooh, yuck, not parenting, not kids, not for me. I want the dink life, which, I'm living double income, no kids. Hey, it's great. Do you think that maybe some reluctance to have kids for certain people, and it's not maybe up to us to judge if this is a bad thing, but there's this almost like distaste for any sort of challenge, for anything that provides growth, to say like, it's hard, so I don't want to do it. Or is that too reductionist? Like, These are obviously smart people you're talking to, so I don't know if that's their
I think
view.
it's interesting because I do know that this intensive micromanaging parenting style, which many teens and 20 somethings and 30 somethings have been raised with, has been conflict avoidant. So parents removing conflict, making things easier, handling things so their kids' life was easier. And I think we know it has led to an inability to deal with some of the harder challenges that prior generations would have thought was just routine life. Whereas if you've been raised with kind of the road smoothed for you, you really get upset by the bumps in the road. So I like the question. I do think, we've managed to make parenting look pretty unattractive because these teens and 20s have been raised by such anxious parents who are worried, like, have you done your homework? Why haven't you done your homework? Why does your teacher say you haven't turned in your homework? Have you started studying yet? How did you do on the test? Why didn't you do better? I'm standing here on the sideline of your football, soccer, lacrosse, whatever, yelling, 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 because I need you to get that point, that goal, that win, so that, like, it's just constant noise. And like, I think it makes parenting look unattractive. I think it makes adulting look unattractive. So I'm kind of not surprised that young people are like, ugh, I don't want it. The other thing I'll say is, you asked me, what are kids thinking? I gave you an example of one young woman in at Northwestern. My own two kids who were raised here in Northern California are not sure they want to have kids. And I think it's largely climate and geopolitical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I bring a kid literally onto this planet that is in such trouble environmentally, and where there is such war and violence and fascism and, et cetera. And also the socioeconomics. I would love to, but y'all have created a society where I can't even afford an apartment, and I get blamed by my granddad for, when I was your age, I had a house and a wife. Well, okay, granddad, now, a one-bedroom apartment is out of reach, even though I have a full-time job. That's not their fault. So I think they've sort of been fed a bait and switch, like, just do all of this and everything will be fine. They're like, nope, doesn't seem like it, y'all.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're wrong.
I was going to ask, like, I don't think they're wrong either. Right? Obviously, you don't think they're wrong. What's the conversation with them look like around that? Is it?
I think I would go very micro. I would go to, yep, totally get it. Valid. You be you. What brings you joy? A life of purpose is important. When we have purpose, when we have meaning, we thrive. So and that is typically something beyond ourselves. What's the issue, the cause, the community, the population, the whatever it might be, that you want to devote yourself to better understanding, sharpening your skills around so you can be useful to that and them. Go craft that life. Choose to be in love, in relationship, in neighborhood, in community, in work, in spaces where you can be you, and go be that person. And to hell with whatever anyone else thinks about whether you should be married or not, whether you should have kids or not, what kind of work you should be doing. If you can look in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm working hard, I'm learning from my mistakes, I'm treating other people well, that's a great life.
You're the parent that we all need, Julie. And I had my own mother on here. She was wonderful, but I'm like, oh, do you need other children? Got a few listeners, I'm sure, who would apply.
You know what? It's interesting that you say that, and I appreciate the compliment. And I will tell you, my mother bought a home with me and Dan 25 years ago. She sold her place, we sold ours, and together we bought one place in the better school district for the sake of our kids, kid number one, and then the second kid we would go on to have. And it's 3 generations under one roof. She's provided childcare. We've been able to go away and snuggle into the relational usness that needs to be nourished. Lord knows if you have kids, you have to keep the relational love going. We should talk about that. But, my mother was great help. And yet I always felt this home was never ours. It was never, ours to decide the furniture, where to put things in the cupboards. There were always 3 adults making decisions. And I think it was hard. And so I'm aware that at all times on this property, I am both a mother and a daughter and a partner and an individual, but mostly the mother and the daughter. So I'm trying to learn in the presence of my mother and the way in which she and her generation tries to shape and control, and I feel, unseen or what have you, how can I in that moment commit that when I am the mother in the next room with my daughter or son, that I will do the growth instantly or the interruption of generational whatevers so that my children aren't feeling in my presence the way I am feeling right now in the presence of my own mother. And I think it's been a laboratory. And I think it's given
Wow.
me greater insight and awareness into parenting because Lord knows I've made tons of mistakes. And yet I'm an author of books telling other people what to do based on, frankly, my mistakes. And I'm
Mm.
healing stuff from prior generations in order to deliver it better to the next generation. So yeah, I appreciate, I'll take that compliment. Um, in what is parenting, but love in action, right? I'm
Yeah.
trying to help you. I'm trying to hold your hand until you don't need
Mhm.
me to any longer.
You talk about, and I don't want to lose the thread there, the relationship between you and your partner and the
Yeah.
importance of that, especially amongst having kids. What advice would you give to someone pursuing or in the midst of parenthood? I know you're like,
No, I got
now
it.
you got to
I
dole out the
got it.
truth.
I got it. Number one, Dan and I tried for 2.5 years to conceive Sawyer, and it was just really not happening. Sawyer's our
Mm-hmm.
eldest, our son. And so we were, like sex was a job and we were, it was what we wanted and it was difficult. And, finally, and then I got pregnant and Dan and I went out to dinner at our favorite, like the Celebration restaurant where we always celebrated like anniversaries and fancy things.
Yeah.
And he handed me a jewelry box and I don't like jewelry. I've told you I wear hardware, right? None of this ever changes.
It's cool hardware.
Okay.
I
So,
don't, former jewelry designer here.
okay.
Fun fact.
Okay.
Oops.
So Dan hands me a little velvet black box and I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? And he was like, here. And I open it and it's a diamond necklace, like a stud diamond on a gold chain. And I'm like, wow, thank you. My God, what is, we're having a baby. Yes. And he's like, this is for us to remember what we had before we had a baby. I'm worried that the baby is going to change everything. And we had been fretting about this. Like, why? Everyone says having a baby ruins your marriage. Having a baby is so hard. It changes life. If we have an amazing partnership that we love, why would we intentionally do anything to harm it? Because that's what people say, children, the toll it will take. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because we think somehow some other or greater or certainly different good is going to come from it. And so he gave me this necklace that in the hard years, when our kids were 5 and 7 was when we were the most unhappy, I would clutch that diamond around my neck and just try to remember this is a phase. This is a phase. We're going to get through it. The necklace was a reminder of who we were before we had kids. And the hope was we would one day return to that degree of relational, loveliness. And we did. And it got even better, such that I didn't need the necklace anymore. I still have it. I didn't like throw away a diamond necklace.
Where did it go?
But I don't wear it because I don't need the reminder of the
Wow.
past because the present is better than the really good past was. And here's the secret. Dan's grandmother, who's long dead, gave us this advice. She said, your children will grow up and leave you if you're lucky when they're gone. Of course, she didn't know with micromanaging parenting, children would never grow up and leave you anymore. But in her day, it was the truth that you were done by 18 or 21 with your kids.
Yeah.
She said, they'll leave you. If you're lucky, you'll still have a relationship intact. And in order for that to be so, you have to make time for each other. And frankly, when she said this to me, it sounded selfish, like this old lady's telling us to like leave the kids behind and go frolic as a couple.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the minute I had kids, I understood. She said, go away every 6 months for 2 nights. She said, it's not the night that's special. It's the day in between. You got to go to a place, check in. It's magical day in between. You wake up, let's say it's a Saturday, you checked in on Friday night, wake up on Saturday. Nobody needs a feeding, a nap, a snack, a diaper. No one's having a tantrum. You can read, you can watch movies, you can go for walks, you can have great sex, you can have the food you want, you can nap, you can do all that. You decide. That night, ends Saturday night, check out on Sunday. It is that cradle, that one day between the nights that you're protecting a solid day by going away for 2 nights. 2 nights, twice a year, she said, will keep you connected. And Lord knows we have had that practice in place from Sawyer's from the first 6 months of his life. Thanks to my mom, we had the built-in childcare where we could do it. I think it's saved us. It's not selfish to go away with your person. It's the love created the kid. You got to keep the love going. Also, you're showing the kid, hey, grown-ups have needs to be just with each other instead of this like hyper focused, you're the center of my world, which can breed narcissism in children. Like, no, show them that adults go do things without kids. And also model for them that adults care about the quality of their relationship, because you want them ultimately, if they're going to be in relationship, to work at it and to know that it takes work.
So good. That in itself is like a TED talk right there, Julie. What advice that you've received. And it's like you say, it's not just powerful for the relationship, it's powerful for what you're showing your children. I love it.
Yeah.
So good. Okay. I want to talk about this idea of helicopter parenting, which we have a very international audience. I'm not sure if this is a broadly understood term. So I want you to just explain what that entails. And then I want to have a bit of a conversation around it, because I feel like it's something that maybe is giving people pause if they're unsure about having kids, seeing the intensity, seeing the intensity in which people are, in many cases, not all, parenting their kids today.
Yeah. So I think the helicopter parenting is a phenomenon in many countries. And I know that because my book on the harm of it has been translated into, I think, more than 20 languages,
Okay.
many languages spoken in Europe and Asia. So helicopter parenting is a micromanaging style of parenting that can take 1, 2, or 3 forms. Number one, it's the constantly worried about you. So worried, I have to know every little thing about your life at all times. I feel unsafe as a parent unless I'm hovering, watching over you. The world is scary and unsafe. And I soothe that in me by, constantly just sort of protecting you in this bubble, watching you all the time. Okay. It's a worried form of, protection and or fierce direction. You will be a doctor. You will be an engineer. Don't come home unless you've, shown me that you've got a law degree. This sort of narrow sense of what success is, where love is conditioned upon the child following that. So it's sort of the authoritarian drill sergeant parent, and the kid really feels unloved unless they're pursuing that path. And the path is largely dictated by the parent. So maybe the kid doesn't even know how to pursue a path on their own. And then the third is the opposite of that, sort of angry. It's like the super helpful best friend parent. I call the concierge, like, I'll handle everything. You forgot it. I'll bring it. I'll remind you. I'll nag you. I will make sure your path is flawless. These look very different, very worried, very stern, very helpful. All of them, and certainly parents can be doing all 3 or just 1 or 2. They deprive the kid of autonomy, agency really in their own life, a sense of control of their own choices. Like, we learn and grow by doing life. We make choices, we learn from them. Oh, ouch, right? If there's no ouch because mom's been so helpful, the kid doesn't learn. If the parents are forcing you down a path and you don't feel, like, I can be a person, I'm just like a dog on a leash, that doesn't fill you with agency. If someone's constantly worried about your existence, you're going to feel not agency, I'm in charge, but like, I am under threat. Someone has to watch out for me at all times. Okay. So this has been a very popular form of parenting. It was first labeled, frankly, I think in 1990, based on how millennials were being raised in the 80s. Play date, parents managing play, was one of the first big dominoes to fall. Instead of kids freely playing with each other, deciding what to play, working out conflict, communicating, we now have parents directing every little piece of it. The one country where this is not happening for sure is France. They're proud that the parents are like, I don't need to be involved in your life. What are you talking about? I don't need that. But there are plenty of European countries where they are saying they see the same problems that we're seeing here in the US. So that's what it is. And it's clearly attached to these psychological challenges that young people are having, depression and anxiety. You're more likely to be anxious if someone's hovering over your life and making you feel like every little damn thing is of consequence.
Yeah. It's interesting. I both relate to having experienced some of that, certainly having witnessed a lot of that. I would say I'm 42 now, having seen many people become parents over the last decade. I would almost say it seems to even, I hate to say, have intensified to a degree. It used to be the case that sometimes you'd see people get babysitters for their children, and it seems like that's becoming less commonplace. We had the kid down the street who got paid $3 an hour to look after all three of us hellraisers, and that was just kind of the norm. I think you talk about that in the book, like who we had to babysit our kids versus now, I don't know, you need a PhD to be able to babysit
right?
or something.
So I can see that this parenting style, look, I know it's harming kids. I can imagine, therefore, that it's turning a lot of people off the prospect of having kids because let's face it, there's so many people who in our lives who have young kids, and the entire ecosystem of that family revolves around that kid's food, that kid's naps, that kid's needs. And so if you try to interact with that couple, it's like, well, we can't. Used to be, you brought your kid with you, stick him in a backpack, put him in a front pack, put him in a little carrier, like have kids will travel. I love that mindset. Like, I want a kid to join me on my journey. I want my kid to know everything we're about. So if we're hikers or campers or travelers, or we like to whatever, like we're going to take our kid with us instead of our entire life has changed to pivot around keeping this kid on some schedule or in some cocoon that we think is necessary because some expert or our friend said. It looks like a nightmare from the outside. So the good news is it doesn't have to be that way. You can parent in a completely different way. It is more old fashioned. We don't want to neglect our kids, but we do want them to have room to breathe and be, and to have autonomy and to play outside of our watchful eye, not, miles away, but in the next room where we're not hovering. Choose that. You can choose that. If you're yearning to have a kid and think parenting sucks, go put yourself in community with people who aren't so stressed out of their minds and anxious and trying to curate their child's every moment. Band together, find each other, reclaim a healthy adulthood, a healthy parenting style. Like, all of that is within your grasp and within your reach. It may be a little alienating if your entire peer group is parenting in this intensive way, but that's toxic. So get out of that. You don't want that,
Totally. No, I agree with you. And I think, even I hear from a lot of child-free women or people considering that path. Well, good example, I saw a meme or something. I don't even think it was a meme. It was something serious today about, on Reddit, somebody said, I'm not going to go on a girls' trip if all we talk about is marriage and babies. And I thought, all the married women with babies I know don't want to talk about marriage and babies the whole girls' trip. Like, find new friends. I know that's kind of a harsh line to take, but I think it's about surrounding yourself with people, regardless of the decisions they make and the paths they take, that it's, yes, of course, life looks different for me than if I was to have children, and my life is going to look different than friends of mine who have kids. But it's about finding those similar values and alignments such that, of course, we make amends to say, hey, we're happy to be the ones to come over. It's not a big deal. We can be friends with people who have kids. But if it's this really intensive everything, the sun, the moon, the stars revolve around this kid's nap schedule, as you say, whether or not I have kids, that's probably not going to be that person or friend for me. At least not for long.
Yeah. And these are tough realities to face. To be really close with a person, say from childhood, or if we were in university, or maybe they were there on our first job, we knew them in our childhood, teens and 20s. And, now one of us is having a kid, and it's hard when you love somebody and they really change because they've bought into this micromanaging parenting thing, or frankly, just like a sleep program for their kid that you just think is really problematic. And, we certainly probably moved on from friendships because we just weren't aligned with the way they were raising their kid. It's hard to respect somebody when you're up alongside their parenting choices and you just think like, wow, we would do this, or we are doing this really differently. So it gets to be very judgmental pretty quickly. And, and I think it's important to examine our like, can I still be around these people even if they're making different choices, or are the choices so problematic and really, in my view, violating some important values that I have, such that I got to walk away from this. It's hard. And then there's loss. And of course, parenting comes with a lack of time for other things typically. So even with the great friends we have with whom we are very aligned, we can often find those friendships withering. How do we maintain the primary relationship if we have one, look after the kid or the multiple kids, earn a living, who has time for friendship? Because self-care is supposed to be in there too. There are too many pieces of the puzzle. And I think for those
Yeah.
saying like kids just feel like a lot, I don't know if I want them. I would say like, yeah, I get that. Totally valid. Totally valid.
You pose some really good questions. And I also really appreciate that you validate the fact that this is hard and there's loss associated with these changes, whether we have kids or don't have kids within our own friendship circles, our families. It's it's something we'll navigate whether or not we have kids ourselves. And it doesn't mean it's easy. And I do think probably like what we were talking about earlier on in our conversation with regards to the growth and the work and everything that you've done yourself to develop this confidence in self, it does take time. And it takes going through the lows,
Yeah.
the struggle, the challenge
Yeah.
to get to those highs.
Those of you who are intentionally child free, are you just like gathering up and having late nights in restaurants and dance clubs and bars and poetry readings? And are you taking sailing trips and climbing mountains? Like, show me the other side. Show me the
Yeah.
good of the child. I'm not questioning that it's good.
Yeah.
I just want to like delight in the imagery and sound of it for a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny you say that because I'm like, oh, it sounds a lot like my life. It's interesting because I think there's with the child. And so to be clear, most people listening are still on the fence
Yeah.
or unsure. Yes, they're living the child-free choice or child-free life, but it's not the same as an affirmative child-free choice because of course they're still not sure. And there is something I think that happens when we say, yes, this is the path I will continue to walk and my life choices will look different as a result of it. It's interesting because I think the child-free path or choice can be painted in this sort of hedonistic view of like Mai Tais on the beach and la la la, and I sleep in. And of course, it can entail those things and they can be wonderful. But I think there also is a depth and a richness, and it can allow for different kinds of things and different ways of bringing meaning to life that doesn't involve kids. And I'll give you as an example. I mean, past few weeks in my life, I have flexibility with my business to go and work from anywhere. So I was in Vancouver visiting my little nephew to be able to spend time, in my brother's home with the kiddo, spending the time there with him for a couple of weeks. I don't think I would have necessarily done that or been able to do that if I had kids of my own.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm really trying to invest in that relationship in a way that I'm able to because I have at this point on that side of the family one nephew and I have no kids of my own. My husband and I, we were just in Greece. We were at a Joe Dispenza, meditation retreat in Basel before that. We live in Europe. These things are within close proximity. We also have, privilege and income and whatnot to allow for those things, but we're moving our bodies. We're going trail running. We spend a lot of time talking about each other, our relationship, growing ourselves, reading books, preparing for conversations like this one. My husband's reading the book as well. We're reading about how to raise self-sufficient adults because we're interested in that. We're interested in people. I'm very passionate about the work I do. I support people both business and life-wise to get clarity and make decisions. And so for me, it's about building this holistic life that happens to not include children, but it's not like because I don't have kids, it's not my full identity.
Yeah.
It's just like, I guess, more room for some of these other things.
For
and
sure.
So it's
good.
Yeah, it's
good.
And
But you did visit the nephew. There was something in you that is like, I need to see my sister, or I really love that you're drawn to the kid. Obviously he's your family member. He's adorable, but I want to push, like, do you need other people? Do we need children in our lives? And we just need other people to have them and caretake them so we can live the more free lifestyle, but still have children to visit when we want to cuddle.
I think we need, and this is my perspective for myself, I think we need different people in our life of different generations. Do they have to be children? I think children have something special and unique that they can offer us and teach us and show us. I know I would speak for people in our audience where some people that there's the connection there is they don't necessarily understand for whatever reason the baby, the toddler, the young child. Maybe it's for them. I spoke with a client today. She's child free as well. We do business coaching. She said, I'm all about mentoring the 14 to 25 year olds. She's in the music industry. I want to coach and support and work with these incredible talents and to nurture them. For me, I'm finding a lot of solace in relationships with older women, specifically child-free older women, to say, what does life look like in your 60s, your 70s when you don't have kids? And so I think as I age, and again, this may be the case whether or not I have kids, it's like getting to know different people from different experiences, different backgrounds, different ages, different genders, different, it doesn't matter per se. It's just about having that breadth of experience, inputs, curiosity about how people are living. And to me, I think that is the connection piece is something we all need.
Yeah, I agree. And I realize as you were talking, I didn't say probably the one greatest thing I've gotten from my kids, which is, it sounds like a cliche because it's so overused in conversation, but for me, it has been just dead on true. My kids have been my biggest teachers. I was alluding before to the laboratory of our home, my mother and me, the daughter, with our generational pattern, and then me being the mother in the next room, and my own daughter and son. And what I've learned as they have emerged and dealt with their anxiety, depression, life challenges and whatnot, and I see how I react and respond to them. And then, the growth that I need to do to learn and accept who they are and make space for that. Um, I I now actually believe that it is quite literally true that they are the most evolved people in the union of Dan's DNA and mine. Like they are they're more evolved than us, one generation more, and their schooling has been more enlightened. Their therapy has been more available. Their self-awareness is off the charts compared to where I was at their age. And I think that's true for that generation, for, let's say millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha to come. And so I'm like, thank God I have this kid because I've learned about my own shit. Because I've got a kid who's like, you know what, Mom, let's talk about boundaries. You know what?
Yeah.
You know what, Mom?
So
like you're really anxious. It's like I'm like, oh gee whiz, like if I didn't have these kids, when would I have learned this? I presume I would have learned it elsewhere, would have learned it from friends. I would have learned it, someone else would have put up the mirror. I've had a mirror put up to myself thanks to my kids. And they are walking with me on my journey in ways I did not appreciate was happening until they emerged into their 20s, I think. And I could see there's a flip side to this. Like, it's not, it used to be I was wiping their butts and their nose. And now they're kind of like, okay, they're attending my growth journey, which is a stunning thing.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like I've made my kids my therapist. I don't mean like
Didn't
that.
Take it that way.
I just mean like I can see that they have a greater emotional intelligence than I do. And I'm watching them and I'm like, okay, I need to level up. Yeah.
I like that you can give voice to obviously not the entirety of this, parent-child relationship, but I think a lot of the moms that we've heard from thus far on the show they've been people a little bit earlier on in this journey, or they have maybe kids who are approaching teenage years, but seeing what it can be like and how it can evolve and the evolution that you can receive or have by merit of raising these incredible people have been able to get from them, and certainly have been able to then nurture them, is really profound and interesting to see and hear about. And I know for myself, I think when I think about parts of that parent-child relationship and experience that I would foresee myself particularly lacking or missing, it would probably be that. Yeah.
And yet you can't miss something you didn't have, right?
This is true.
And that's good.
Yeah.
I think that's good. So just like I'm asking with a sort of wide-eyed curiosity, what is it like to not have kids, to have time for other things besides child rearing? Someone without kids, particularly someone intentionally choosing it as opposed to somebody in the space of longing and loss and, wants it, but it's not working out, to intentionally choose it, you can be curious about what's it like on the other side, but there's not a missing, I think. It's like,
no,
it's a different life. Is life great when you're doing 29 different things, or is life great when you're doing 3 different things? Do we want breadth or depth? It's hard to have breadth and depth. Some people want breadth. Some people want depth. Some people like to visit the beach and do nothing. Some people like to go and travel every tourist stop, they can. Like, people make different choices. And I think
Yeah.
that's the ultimate message here. Know
you.
yourself, make your choice, be willing to be humble and curious, know your triggers, know your needs, know your dreams, act accordingly.
Julie, you, I think, have encapsulated this all as best as we could possibly hope to do so with such a complex topic. Okay, 5 rapid fire questions. Being a parent is?
Hard.
Being a parent is not?
Hard.
What is one thing that you believe would make this decision a little bit easier, if that's such a thing, for people who are on the fence about whether to have kids?
A sibling dying in a car crash and their children have to go somewhere, and you decide, yes, I will take these children into my life and I will make it work.
What's one thing that you would like child-free people to know?
I am not judging you.
If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's currently on the fence about whether or not to have kids, what would that be?
Let the decision come from the depths of your soul and your spirit, your deep knowing of yourself, why you're here on this planet. Don't let it be what your parents need, your friends need, society seems to need, even your partner. This is a deeply personal decision that, if you make it, will entail such an investment of time and resources. You want to be glad you did it. And so don't let anyone tell you have to. Come to it willingly, or decide not to willingly.
Thank you. Julie, where can we find you? What do we need to know? How can we buy your books?
Thank you.
What would you like to share with us?
You know what? I'm working on my next book, which is going to be a book for parents of adult children. So for those who are intentionally child-free, like that might sound like a nightmare. Like, what? Parenting adult children? Like, it keeps going? Yes. More than ever nowadays. So be on the lookout for that in a couple of years. In the meantime, I am everywhere on social media at J. Lythcott Haims, my first initial, last name, no hyphen, J. Lythcott Haims on social. My website is julielythcotthaims.com. And I have a blog I write called Julie's Pod, a safe space for vulnerable conversations. I write about what I experience in the world. I write pretty vulnerably, and that's at jlythcotthaims.substack.com. So check me out in any of those places. I love to interact and intersect. I'm rooting for humans to thrive, and I'm grateful to everyone who's still with us, because you decided there was something good here that you needed, and I'm glad to know it.
Something great here. Thank you so much for being here and for this wonderful conversation, Julie.
Thank you, Keltie. Appreciate you finding me.
That concludes another episode of the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's conversation. Now, if you have not already done so, first of all, I want you to give us a follow over on Instagram. Our handle is @KidsOrChildFree. Otherwise, I will link to that in the show notes. And what I would love for you to do is to slide on into my DMs and let me know, who would you like to hear on the podcast as an upcoming guest? This can either be someone in particular that you would love for me to have a conversation with, or maybe it's a certain type of guest. There's somebody in particular that you are wanting to hear from, whether that be, hey, Keltie, I want to hear from somebody who had kids later in life, or I want to hear from somebody who specializes in childhood trauma, or whatever it may be. Let me know who you want to hear from, who would be an ideal guest, and I will do my very best to get them onto the podcast for a future episode.